Hey everybody, welcome to another episode of the LitRPG Podcast. I'm Ramon Mejia. I'm here to bring you the latest LitRPG news, reviews, and of course author interviews. Episode number 135 of the show. And I have like 8 new LitRPG releases for you folks at home. Got a little lost in my own silliness there for a second. But we have 8 new reviews, including the FPS Deity, a fantastic LitRPG series, book number 1. Then after that, I'll have the review for Bunker Core Control book, Core Control, book number 1 rather. Then after that, it'll be Infinite Exodus, a sci-fi LitRPG, Infinite Exodus, book number 1. Then it'll be Gaia's Gambit Evolution Online, number 1. Then Lord of the Flame, a LitRPG novel, Call of Carrethen, book number 2. Then it'll be Game Changer, Reality Benders, book number 3. And Caverns of Spirits after that, a LitRPG and GameLit adventure, Stonehaven's League, book number 3. And last but not least, Freehaven Online, Lady Thunderlord into 80s, a LitRPG adventure. This is the second book in that particular series. So before we get into that, though, we're going to go into LitRPG news. And a little bit of news we're going to begin with promotion by Domino Finn. He's recently released his 3rd book in his Reboot Online series, the Afterlife Online book series, I should say. And he's put book 1 out for sale for 99 cents. It'll be on sale for the next couple of days until September the 30th, rather, 2018. It'll be on sale for 99 cents. It's actually a pretty decent book, so if you want to go check it out, now is the time to do it. If you haven't already done so, go get it while it's on special. In other LitRPG news, well, just one other story. Jeffrey fucking Logan has posted an update on the Slime Dungeon side-scroller video game that he's making. He's finished the first boss battle encounter, and it looks rather interesting. So I'm going to share that with you folks. Turn on the music just a tiny bit, because it's a little louder. So it's actually a really interesting combination of the character like scrolling around the screen, of like actually fighting the big boss. I don't know if you guys can actually see the whole thing. Yeah, like it looks really nice actually. Yeah, see they got like this adventurous like boss battle stuff, and it's against the gargoyle. Like it actually looks like a proper like fight in boss fight. So like I'm really quite proud of my buddy Jeff fucking Logan, who of course writes the Slime Dungeon Chronicles. So go check out both those things. So I'm definitely looking forward to actually seeing the final version of this whenever it's happening to be done. And I'll definitely shell out the cash for it to support my friend also, because it looks entertaining. Okay, so out now we have these are the novels that have come out recently. Just haven't had a chance to read them. They came in the last few days of this week, including the 3rd book in the Afterlife Online series by Domino Finn called Trojan. Also the novel and the second novel in the Adventures of Hork series for the Arena. These are new. The Hall, book number 1 of the Miraglian Saga. Also, the Idol System, the new Journey. Also out is Phoenix World Beta Test Zone number 5. Now, despite the fact that it says Zone number 5, this is the first book in the series, so don't let that throw you off. Also out is Roguelock, a LitRPG adventure, The Wayfarers, book number 1. This is actually a novella, so it's about on Amazon about 70-ish pages. So I'll be aware of that. New in the LitRPG audiobooks, we just have one this week. Axelion 99, the LitRPG novel, that is out as an audiobook right now. Now, in upcoming LitRPG, we have these titles that I know they're coming out in the near future. We have a couple new additions, I think, to the list here, but most of them are just coming out in the near future, including Couch Potato Chaos Game Mound, which is out in the next couple days on September 28th. On September 29th, Black Flame in the Barren Steppe, Realm of Arkham book number 8 will be out. So if you're a fan of that series, you must be looking forward to that one. On September 30th, it'll be Rebirth Online, a LitRPG adventure. On October the 1st, The Arena's Call, Adventures on Brad, book number 4. On October the 5th, the Advent Red Mage book number 1. It'll be out on October the 5th there. On October the 8th, it'll be Kingdom of the Dead and NPC's Path, book number 2. On October the 12th, it'll be Dan the Destroyer. It'll be the book number 3 in that series, called in the Golden Girls and Glory book series. On October the 16th, it'll be the 11th book in the Pharaoh series, The Blades of the Borderlands. On October the 14th, Random, The Chaos of Lincoln Heart, Barakador, book number 6. On October the 19th, it'll be Siphon, A Touch of Power. On October the 26th, it'll be Beginnings, Peaks of Power, book number 1. On October the 31st, it'll be Base Status Online, Unlike the Hero's LitRPG Journey. On November the 1st, it'll be Neverfall, Mark of the Hero, book number 1. Then on the November the 2nd, Dungeons of Dungeon Installation, which is the 4th book in the Divine Dungeon series, so a lot of folks are definitely looking forward to seeing that one. November the 8th, it'll be The Parallel of Sci-Fi LitRPG, Infinite Edifice, book number 1. Now we're actually reviewing the first book in the series on the show today. The second book is already up for pre-order, so if you happen to enjoy that first one, the second one's available. Also, November 18th, Guardians of the Round Table, book number 3 will be out. On November 19th, Song of Shadow. This is the second book of the Bards of Bardleonis series. That's the spin-off series, I want to say. Written by the Vasily Mahenko, who's the original author of the Way Shaman series. It's in the same game universe. It's just with different characters, different main character. So there we go. November the 20th is the third book in the Island Kingdoms War Evolution Online, book number 3. I'm actually reviewing the first book in the series as well on the show today, but book 2 is already out, and book 3 is again up for pre-order on November the 20th. December the 10th, it'll be Level Up book number 2 called Hero. And on December the 16th, it'll Freehaven Online, book number 3. I'm reviewing book number 2 in this series on the podcast today as well. So there we go. All kinds of new and interesting things. We'll move on to the LitRPG reviews. And in LitRPG reviews, we're going to begin with FPS Deity, a fantasy LitRPG series, book number 1. I believe the second book in the series already might be out as well. I just read book number 1, though. It is 447 pages, $2.99. It is not available on Kindle Unlimited, though. But honestly, per page count, the price is pretty decent. Here's the author's description. By the age of 80, General Gamma Fenherin has long since retired and is now on the last days of his life, spending most of the time on a virtual first-person shooter game he truly loves and enjoys called Gaia's Paradox. Reminiscing about the days of his former military glory as his real is nearing death's door. That is verbatim what it says, folks. Follow the adventure of Farron as he ventures into this new world, and he suddenly transmigrates in New World Nuiel. Again, verbatim, is what it says. And just the novel description and some of the wording there kind of indicates some of the issues that are in the novel. The author also describes it as a fantasy LitRPG series with a touch of transmigration/reincarnation novel trope. Yep. Okay. The review basically is really simple. This is a web novel series that has been collected as a novel and published, which is why it's not in Kindle Unlimited. It's actually still available for free online. So if you don't feel like purchasing, you just want to test it out, see if you like the writing style, it's online. You can just do a search for the same name on the internet and you can find it. The story concept behind this is actually kind of interesting. I really did like the premise of it. The actual storytelling, though, unfortunately, and the writing is bad. It almost feels like the novel is either translated from another language or that English just isn't the author's native language. And so getting things to sound right and some of the technical writing aspects of English are kind of missing or lost sometimes. Either way, there's a load of spelling errors and grammar errors in the story, and the structure of the story, like the way the sentences are phrased and organized, just feels a little bit off, which is why I said it feels like it's not from a native English speaker or might just be translated for some other language. And additionally, there are some shifts in points of view that are just jarring, confusing. They don't always make sense in the story. Like sometimes they're just these little bits of storytelling that might do a little world building, but they don't make sense in the larger context of the story. And they kind of take you out of the flow of the story. So like I said, there's a lot of structural and technical writing issues in this novel. And if you can ignore that, you might find something you enjoy. I didn't, unfortunately. Story-wise, this is a mostly slice-of-life novel that is transported to a game world through transmigration setup. The main character, Carrethen, is an impairment. He's an avid sci-fi MMR player. He's maxed out his character, and he's now trying to complete a rare, challenging quest. When he beats it, he's transported to an RPG fantasy world. And I don't know if I want to say it's reincarnation because he's just a younger version of himself. But more importantly, in the story, he has his same maxed out levels and his same maxed out character with all the high tier armor and weapons. And this is essentially an OP story, not an overpowered character story. And the main character is super overpowered for everything he does. And this new world of stories and fantasy, so he kind of has all his like sci-fi weaponry and all his sci-fi armor, like his heavy mech armor and everything. And the story is really just again slice of life as he explores the world, goes on adventures, kills anything that dares to attack him and his new friends. And there's genuine RPG advancement in the story as he gets like general experience points to like gain new skills and in line with like the fantasy world. But the thing for me is that this story doesn't really work because there's never really any challenge for the main character. He's super overpowered again. And that's kind of a hard story to tell because a lot of the enjoyment, honestly, that I have with the story in LitRPG is that, you get to see the main character grow in either power or personality or in character development, and hopefully everything. But one of the big, signifiers for the genre is that, the main character actually has, some challenges that make him grow, and none of that kind of exists here. And again, that's also a quality of the challenge of really writing an overpowered character story. Like one of the best examples of when it's done right is One Punch Man. Like that character from that anime and manga is super overpowered. Like he's the most powerful being ever, and he beats everybody with one punch, right? But the author and the writer of that story is still able to create interesting story aspects that exist separately from the main character's combat. And even in combat, though, you still feel like there's a chance that he's going to like potentially lose. Like, is this going to be the one time he loses? And ultimately never is. But still, like, there's still that feeling of like, is it going to be? And and that just doesn't exist in this story, which is unfortunate. Like I said, the premise is actually interesting because you're introducing kind of these sci-fi aspects to a fantasy world, and it kind of makes sense within the world building, like the way the game rules are set up. It's just the actual execution of the story, the actual execution of the technical writing, really left a lot to be desired. And ultimately, I was kind of bored by the way the story ended up unfolding, especially on like the technical writing side, which is really hard for me because it's really rare for me because usually I can ignore it. And in this case, it's just like, this definitely affects the enjoyment of the storytelling and of the premise. So it is unfortunate. Again, a good concept, but the actual execution just didn't work. So for me, it gets a score of 5 out of 10. I actually get into being kind of bored with it. The FPS Deity, a fantasy LitRPG series, book number 1, with the score of 5 out of 10. So there we go. Okay, on to our next book review. It's going to be Bunker Core Control, book number 1 by Andrew Seppel. I'm going to go with Seppel. It's 244 pages, $4.99. It is available on Kindle Unlimited. And here's the author's description. Wine might have been human once. It's hard to say. Now is a bunker core, a nanomachine controller responsible for an entire complex. Of course, the place is a bit wrecked, and the world outside is ruins, and he's pretty sure that whoever put him there is going to come looking for him at some point. And then there's the Raiders. Dungeon core, post-apocalyptic style, come for the mutants, stay for the dystopian adventure. So there you go. That's the author's description. And this is exactly what it's advertised as. It's a good dungeon core story with all the traps, the minions, and tech trees you'd expect. Now, if you're not familiar with what a dungeon core story is, essentially a story told from the point of view of a dungeon. If you've played fantasy games before, like you have your fantasy characters, they go dungeon diving. They go into like these ruins or some other place where they kill a bunch of monsters, and they eventually like beat the dungeon and get the big treasure, right? Well, a dungeon core novel is kind of the similar story told from the point of view of the actual dungeon itself. So you're getting a different perspective. And a lot of times with these stories, it's the dungeon being sentient in some way, shape, or form, and he's creating traps and changing the layout of his dungeon for effectiveness as like adventurers come through and try to you should actually beat the dungeon, and that's what this is. So you have again traps, minions, tech trees, where the dungeon advances as it gains experiences and resources, and it allows them to do different things and upgrade and things of that nature. So it's a fun story, kind of genre in general, and it definitely has LitRPG elements, and the story is in line with that. The LitRPG elements in the story are a little bit lighter. Like, you don't see a lot of as many numbers and actual visual text trees. Like, you definitely see some, but they're definitely rare compared to some of those stories in the genre. And a lot of the advancement of those text trees are actually described in text instead of like tables, or instead of like numbers and stat sheets or character sheets kind of things. But they still exist in the story. It is definitely RPG, and I definitely enjoyed the more sci-fi advancement of this particular dungeon core story, because a lot of the dungeon core stories that I've read in the past are more fantasy based, and that definitely has appeal. Only one other way I can think of is sci-fi ish, and that's going to be the laboratory futuristic dungeon core. And this one actually reminded me a lot of that, because they're both set in post-apocalyptic futures. They're both like technical side kind of conceptualized dungeon cores, and they both have like tech trees where they can advance through study and completion. So if you like that other novel, you'll probably like this one as well. And again, this is set in a post-apocalyptic world where the dungeon core has to defend itself against raiders and a bunch of other things. And you kind of get, in addition to like the dungeon core's point of view, though, in this particular novel, I really like the fact that you actually get other points of views. Like, the novel doesn't just stay fixed on the one dungeon core. It actually does other points of view. So it's a multi point of view narrative structure as well, where you get to see the survivors of the apocalypse, how they see the world through their eyes. There are several different raider groups. You get to see through several of them, in addition to some other characters in this world. What I liked about this particular story is that allowed the story to kind of expand beyond just the static dungeon labyrinth, and you got to see a little more world building that aspect. It's not a ton, but you also get to see like the setup of like, oh, these are some very interesting potential storylines, and if they're developed, or you kind of get to speculate, oh, I can see like maybe where the author is going to do something cool with this particular low place, or this particular group of people, or this particular group of mutants, or whatever. And it was very interesting. So for me, while the story in itself doesn't do anything on game mechanics side that's particularly innovative, like it really just was like a dungeon core. Like, if you've read one of these, you'll see like a lot of similarities, and there's nothing like too innovative on the game mechanics side. It's still a good story, and again, there's a lot of like interesting room for some story direction that I think has a lot of potential for the series. And for me, it was entertaining. So it's fun. And that's kind of the big thing for me. It's like, is it an entertaining story? Great. Is it LitRPG? Yes. And then it's either positive or negative. So for me, this one definitely hit the spot with the score 7.5 out of 10. I had a good time with it. And that's Bunker Core Control book number 1 with the score of 7.5 out of 10. There you go. Okay. Sorry about that. Wrong button. Wrong number 3 on the thing. Okay, so our next review is going to be Infinite Exodus, a sci-fi lit RPG Infinite Exodus book number 1 by N.R. Whitaker. And here we go. It's going to be 239 pages. It is $2.99. It is available on Kindle Unlimited. Here's the author's description. Locked inside an unreleased game awaits a world of untapped possibilities and consequences. Gerard is a would-be scientist, not a soldier, but his father is nowhere near fit for the open-ended rescue mission into the Parallel, a hyper-realistic VR world that was stolen for the government applications from genius game developer Ned Dixon. As a fan of Dixon's immersive and often twisted worlds, Gerard thinks he knows what he's getting into by taking his father's place. But within the Parallel awaits an infinite number of sinister surprises. The mission is simple. Play through the deadly game storyline to save the living researchers trapped within. Not so simple, dealing with a snarky AI who knows Gerard doesn't belong, fending off monstrous Angel Dixon program to make the crew's job as difficult as possible. So there we go. That is the author's description, and it's fairly accurate. This is technically a lit RPG. It's again 239 pages, 200 hints, available on Kindle Unlimited. And again, it's technically an RPG. There is RPG progression. The main character does gain levels and has stat points to assign. And a lot of the beginning part of it is set up in the sci-fi world, set up what the world is like, why the main character is taking his father's place, all that kind of stuff. But by the 60% mark, you're in the story and you're there. So you're in the game world of infinite reality, and it's a full immersion game. So the setup to me seems a little overly complicated, especially considering you don't ever return to the real world in this particular aspect of the story. And most, like, so it feels like it's a kind of a wasted world building. Like, even the world building is done decently well. Again, it's kind of a waste because you don't ever go back to the world at this point in the story. But again, there are RPG mechanics of a sort. The main character and his team level up as the story goes on. There are several looks at character sheets. There are item descriptions and monsters with levels and HP. However, that's kind of the extent of it. All the RPG mechanics are essentially surface level, and they never actually have any depth. There's no actual other game mechanics story, which is kind of sad, which why it makes it feels more like, a sci-fi story, maybe set in a VR world, but the actual game stuff doesn't ever feel real. Like it, and maybe this is just a personal opinion, personal interpretation what's there, because like I said, there are actual text saying, this is the main character's character sheet, and this is his HP, and this is a monster level, and then their HP. So those things do exist in this drone. That's all if you're looking for, great. But for me, it just felt like, I don't know, it felt like those things were just kind of there, and like the characters didn't really have any interest in actually having any game powers or any game abilities or any game skills or even exploring or using them. The combat scenes felt very just like sci-fi, sure, like they're shooting guns or like swinging a space sword and fighting monsters and stuff, but there were never any descriptions for like HP, damage notifications or any kind of references for that made those stats interesting. The stats that are seen in the game are on character sheets, but the main character will in the story just use a particular stat to increase every level, but the effects of that stat are never shown. So even though like that number increases, it's like, that doesn't matter because there's really no impact in the actual story in the way that the main character fights or acts. Additionally, there's just like some weird points in the story where like items have certain descriptions and stat boost or skill boost, but those skills are never seen anywhere else in the story. So it's like, +1 to long range shooting, but that's not a skill you ever see anywhere else in the story, but like a phrase. So it's a very interesting mix. I think the author is just trying to, in personal opinion, trying to find a balance between like, super crunchy numbers and not super crunchy numbers, because they maybe find a distractor, and that's often a balance that a lot of authors have to do. But for me, it's just like, it was a little too far to one side where it's just not enough information to make the game world feel fleshed out. It felt less like a game world and more just like, this is like a sci-fi story with, and occasionally there's like some informational stuff about levels and HP and stuff. So for me, though, it just didn't really work out. And that's mostly the reason why. On the story side, it's trapped in a game with a chosen one kind of aspect to it. The main character joins this advanced game and must complete an escort mission with the military, or hundreds of people trapped in the game may die. More importantly, the game is supposed to be like this simulation to help humanity find a new place to live. But it really just turns out to be like this semi-connected adventures, some decent fights, with only like a small variety of enemies. So like the combat isn't like too varied. Going on some adventures, sci-fi exploration with like an AI and his little group. But again, as the story goes on, like a lot more of the game side of it kind of disappears. I'm between like the 70% mark, where like it almost feels like this, like that game aspect disappears entirely. Like it just stops even referring it until like the very end of the story. And it's like, okay, that's an interesting choice. And that's again why I feel like, it didn't really give me that LitRPG fulfillment. It didn't kind of scratch that LitRPG, because again, as the story continues, it's just like, these game elements stop being important or even like referred to sometimes, and that is unfortunate. So as a story, it's an okay story. It's nothing bad about it. There's some really good moments, and again, I like the world building at the beginning, but as LitRPG, for me, it just left something to be desired. It didn't quite hit good for me, and that's unfortunate, because again, on the writing side, there's nothing really wrong with it. The game stuff again feels very surface level, and even again, there are stats. They don't have an impact on the story, and that's how I felt about most of, the informational game mechanics. It's like, that's just like, those are words, and they don't actually have like meaning in the story. But again, that's a personal opinion. You feel free to go ahead and read it and form your own opinions. But for me, Infinite Exodus, the sci-fi LitRPG, story, excuse me, gets a score of 6 out of 10. So there we go. Okay, on to our next review. It'll be Gaia's Gambit Evolution Online, book number 1, written by D.L. Harrison. Okay, it is 294 pages, $3.99. It is available on Kindle Unlimited. Here's the author's description. The end of the world had come, and humanity was in danger of extinction, but it would survive. Had survived, as far as Jason knew. Jason lived the last millennia in a virtual utopia, which was slowly driving him insane. His mind suspended in a computer matrix, an ark of sorts, until they could grow new bodies and rejoin the real world to rebuild. It would be a long time before the Earth recovered. Only 4 million out of billions had been saved in such a fashion, and he was one of the lucky ones. At least, he'd been in a utopia until that morning, when he woke up in a new world on a bed of moss in the middle of a forest. Alone. No breakfast, no coffee, and no bacon. He wasn't sure what to do, but he didn't really have a choice but to move forward. It was either that or starve himself to death over and over. Not really a choice at all. Well, either that or be killed by monsters. He just wished he knew what the hell Gaia was thinking. Elves, dwarves, evil races, magic, swords, and bows. The AI must have lost her mind. So there you go. Okay, this story was actually recommended by somebody. I apparently had missed it when it first came out and just hadn't found the time to go back and read it until like this week. And I'm honestly glad I did. It was actually turned out pretty good. The premise is interesting. And like the first, I want to say like 10% of it is definitely set up for like why the world is the way it is. It's the Earth as you know it is gone, and the remnants of humanity living as digitized citizens for the last like 15,000 years. When the AI notices that people are going crazy from that perfect utopia that you created for them, and he changes things into an RPG fantasy world where people can be challenged, they can feel pain and grow again. And Jason, the main character, chooses to be a mage type and finds himself up other players like himself, especially a female one. And the story really turns into like this slice of life kind of adventure with wave combat. The main character figuring out what the game system is, contemplating magical theory to maximize his power and progress, finding companions, going on adventures, and again, fighting like this wave type of format for the first novel. I think it changes in book 2 and 3, which are, again, 2's out, 3's coming up later. Game mechanic wise, it's actually pretty decent. There are regular character sheets, damage numbers, there's experience points, skill stats, magical theory is well thought and flexible, and everything really feels like there's actual numerical values, and it feels like there are definite game mechanic boundaries. Like the main character can't just spam a bunch of spells. Like you definitely, if you add up the numbers, like, oh, that definitely matches what his mana pool is, and he's super squishy, so he doesn't get hit a lot. But even when he does, like, oh, there's huge chunks of coordinate. I feel like there's definite like math here that's being followed. The game mechanic, the RPG game world has hard limits, and how powerful skills can be, and magic is limited to a degree with the actual game mechanics. I don't want to spoil everything, but again, it kind of forces players to make hard choices because they can't be masters of everything, or they can try to be, but they're going to be less effective. And so it's very interesting for me, at least, to kind of see the main character's thought processes of like why he's making certain choices, game mechanic wise and character development wise, and and I think that was probably the thing that I liked the best of it, because there's a lot of like game theorizing and magical theory kind of stuff, and it's nice to see like that insight of the main character and why he make those progression choices. Overall, I had a really good time with this. I had a good time with this. The writing can be a little dry sometimes, and common again isn't the most viscerally described. It's very tactically oriented, because again there's waves of enemies that come through the entire combat series in the story, and it's the main character, another player, and like some other players like working together, making defenses and kind of doing that. And so it's very tactical and interesting in that respect. However, there are some of the reviews that say like, oh, it gets a little repetitive, and I can actually see where that point of view comes from. For me, it wasn't as repetitive as it could be for some other people, just because I was so interested in seeing the intelligent way the main character fought and acted and planned and progressed as a caster. All that game theory stuff is really fun for me, like seeing like, oh, I might not have done that, but I would have done this, and like just thinking of myself like, oh, how I would have made my character progress in different or similar ways according to the game rules that are definitely expounded upon in this novel. So like there's a lot of good information in game theory and details about things. So it's very interesting for me, at least. I had a good time with it. Gets a score 7.6 out of 10 for me. That's Gaia's Gambit Evolution Online, book number 1, with a score 7.6 out of 10. So I had a good time with it. Okay, on to our next review. It'll be Lord of the Flame, a LitRPG novel, Call of Carrethen, book number 2, written by Stephen Work. Okay, it is 440 pages, $4.99. It is available on Kindle Unlimited. And here's the author description. Oh, the author did ask that I tell you folks that the novel description for book number 2 has spoilers for book number 1. So when I read it in a few seconds, just be aware that if you're listening to it, it's probably going to spoil a lot of book number 1. So if you don't want to hear that spoiler, then just skip the review. It ends up getting like a 6 out of 10 for me. So just heads up, FYI. So there you go. Okay, here's the novel description for book number 2. The Ripper is dead. I know. I killed him. Jack is dead and so are all my friends, or at least that's what I thought. An artificial intelligence named Wintermute created a backup world off to save those who died in Carrethen, and I've been sent to get them out. But this isn't the Carrethen I once knew. The world is decayed, corrupted, and twisted, filled with things that should not be possible. Twisted, mutated monsters, shattered landscapes, and sunken. Players who have died so many times that they've lost their minds and identity, reduced to creatures fueled by nothing but pure rage. They call it the Dark World. I spawned naked and alone and I managed to survive, but there's just one problem. My special power of restoration aren't working. I can contact Wintermute, and I have no idea where to find my friends. Okay, that's like 3 problems. That's me saying that, though. Okay. Are they scattered across the realm with the Unchained? Have they become one of the mindless horde of the Sunken? Or worse, are they trapped in Sheol, the cavern prison at the center of the world, guarded by a max-level boss, the Lord of the Flame? No one has ever come close to defeating him, but if it's the only way to rescue Jack, my friends, and the rest of the players trapped in this terrible realm, I'll be the first one to do it. So there you go. That's the author's description of that story. Full disclosure, I received an advance copy for review, but I purchased a copy when it became available, and it's actually available now. So as I'm reading this, it is actually available for you to purchase and read. Okay. Book 1 in this series had some issues, and there go read the review on LitRPGpodcast.com if you want to about book 1. I essentially got a score of 7 out of 10 because despite the writing issues and some of the waviness in it, this story ended up doing pretty well. Like the twist at the end was good. The actual story development in the story felt it felt good. Like even though the premise was sort of upon sort of online, it's like, oh, the author did try to do something well, and the twists in the story kind of made up for some of the storytelling failings. And so it just barely squeaked into the 7 out of 10 mark range. This story, book 2, doesn't. And that's for it. It basically, on a technical level, the novel isn't poorly written. It isn't. The technical writing, there aren't grammar errors or spelling errors that I noticed when I was reading it. The action scenes are still very, decent to good. It's just that I couldn't enjoy the story, and it was super unfortunate because I wanted to. I wanted the story to get better from book 1, and it just didn't. And I was like, oh, that's really unfortunate. If anything, it kind of went down. The second story kind of feels like a less polished version of book number 1, I should say. The outline of the story is essentially the same. There's an introduction of the world. There's a setup for the bad guy. Then there's like this huge, like middle section of the novel. This is essentially a huge level grind. Then there's like a little bit of like progression of the storyline, but for the most part, it's just an excuse to have fights and leveling. Even though like the main character doesn't actually level a ton. And like you introduce like characters from book 1, you get new characters that are original to the story, and you get a little bit of development. Most of the time, it's just that this huge, like I want to say like 70-80% story is just like this level kind of grind, and that's okay. It is what it is. But then there's this like smaller end scene where it's just like, oh, here's this resolution suddenly, and maybe there's a twist and maybe there's not. And again, it was just formatted wise, like it was like, this seems like it's almost an exact like copy of like book number as far as like how the story is actually developed and told. I was like, oh, that's interesting. That's a choice. But again, I was hoping for like more progress, like things developing in different ways, hopefully, and it just didn't. Thematically, it's kind of the same as it is book one, even though in book one it was trapped in the game, die in the game, now in real life. Those were the stakes. That's kind of the premise. In book two, it's similar, even though it's not supposed to be. Like in the second book, the premise essentially is that all the people who died in book one, and again, this isn't spoiler, it's in the novel description. They didn't really die after all. They didn't really die, and so they were backed up in this like backup server by the artificial intelligence that was controlling, that was trying to help the main character out, and so they're all trapped there. And the main character is sent into this supposed copy of the game to try to save them, even though there's no description of like how he's supposed to save them or how the main character is supposed to save them. Except that when he gets there, he finds that it's not one life kind of death. Instead, death is treated differently. But even in the second novel, even though there's not supposed to be like this finality to death, like where you just have one death and that's it, and you're done, caputo, it still feels like death is permanent. And so even though it's technically not the same, it feels the same, because no matter what happens in the story, the main character is not going to die, and you get that feeling super from the very start of the story. And so that was one of the issues I had with book number, and that because of that premise, like the main character is never going to die, because that kind of ruins the story. And it's the same thing here. And I'll talk about like what the death system is in this game in a little bit. But again, it's one of the issues like, this second book has a lot, if not more, the same issues that book number one. But the storyline and the plotline didn't make up for it like it did in book one. And that's super unfortunate, because I really wanted this to be better. And I really wanted to enjoy it more. I didn't, and that's unfortunate. So I'm going to go into like just some of the issues where I had with the story. You can skip it if you want to. It's the score was going to be 6 out of 10. But there are multiple instances for me where the RPG rules in the story aren't consistent and they change suddenly. And that's probably one of the bigger pet peeves for me personally, is that when the world rules for a story aren't consistent and they just kind of seem to shift and change as the story needs them. And for me, in a fantasy story, it's less of an issue, because it's magic, it's fantasy, that's fine. But in a LitRPG story, for me, one of the things I love the most about the story is that these are like hard-coded world rules, and so they're not going to change. And I can kind of plan my own like imaginary character. I can see like the boundaries of the system, or like where exploits can be had, but that's all based on the kind of fundamental concept that the rules are hard coded. They're solid. The game mechanics are solid. They're all like, they're all coded like almost like they're physical laws for physics, and that wasn't the case here. And the biggest example for me was like the way the death is handled in the story. And I mentioned this before a little bit. Within the first 15% of the novel, the rules for death in the story change like 3 times. And it's first it starts out with the main character thinking, if you die in the game, you die in real life. You're like, that's the way it was there. The AI told me that that's the way it was in this new world as well. Then it shifts. Then it's, you die in the game. But, and again, this is minorly spoilery, so if you don't want to hear this, just skip it. But if you die in the game, instead you respawn without your memories, and the more you die, the more memories you lose, until you turn into this mindless mob, and called the Sunken, and there's no real setup for that kind of system where like you're losing memories for some reason. But it is what it is. But it's just then the third time it shifts again to you don't just turn into a mob. There's to this infinite life mob, it's there's one person in this whole story who can actually kill them permanently because they have a special power, and then of course the main characters happens to have been given, not earned, the one power to reverse this whole memory loss thing. And then it turns out again, some players aren't really killed after all, instead they're turned into random monsters. And I'm like, it's just one shift after another. And like even like this fundamental premise of like what happens with death, that just makes the story just like it made it really enjoyable, because like I didn't know where the boundaries of the rules were, and that for me is kind of a big thing, especially in like the genre of LitRPG, because that's one of the things that makes makes sense to me in that in a LitRPG story, in this LitRPG world, it's like, oh, the rules are fixed. Like the way to progress is fixed. Like if you understand the rules, if you understand the way the world works, you can become powerful. You can become strong. You can become like a better version of what like your main character can, right? But in a world like this, where the rules are kind of shifting all the time, where even like the way death is treated is just changing and the story goes on just because with no real explanation. It's like, oh, that's just less appealing for me, unfortunately. And again, it's not the only inconsistency. It's just that's just like one of the bigger examples. Any other like inconsistencies in the story are acknowledged as being like, oh, I know this is different and I know it's weird, but it's kind of just waved away by the character saying, oh, this is a new broken dark world of the last one, so ignore that. That's just the way the world goes. So there are a lot more examples in the story of these kind of things. The other major thing is for me is like, oh, the main character probably should have died a lot more, but she didn't because the story wouldn't advance the same way. And this is to me like the most, that's kind of thing that kind of turned me out from the very beginning, because within the first, I want to say like, I don't know, 10 pages of the novel, the main character probably should have died like 3 times. Like really, she should have. She like spawns in this new world. Like it starts off really quick, like, oh, you're right in the game from like page 1. And so she spawns in this new world and she doesn't have any weapons. She doesn't have any armor. And she spawns in and she like realizes, oh, there are a lot of high leveled creatures around me, and so she takes off running and she's immediately attacked and she's hit again and again, and the novel is described as like, oh, the first time she's hit with like a bow crossbow from like these giant monsters, she loses 50% of her health, and then she hits by another one, she hits 25% health, and you think like, oh, they're gonna kill her, and they probably should have. And then she like jumps off this 200 like foot cliff into like the water below, and she doesn't take any damage for some reason. And you think, oh, okay, maybe that's it. But no, instead she's attacked by a monster who turns out to be like 100 levels higher than her. But instead of dying, she just magically escapes because some other lower leveled player comes and helps her and saves her, even though like she really should have died at least 3 times from that, just like the first 10 pages. And it's things like that also like, oh, this is inconsistent. Like if you're going to set up game rules, if you're going to set up world rules, for me, it's like, oh, you should follow them. Otherwise, what's the point of having them? You know what I mean? And that, for me, is probably the thing that was the most frustrating about the story, is that all these examples of like, oh, these rules don't matter. The game server really doesn't matter if you're not going to follow them. And it's just going to be like this one wavy, like multiple saves for the main character or multiple saves for like other story plots. And so for me, overall, even though I found other aspects of the story interesting, and again, the combat, it's relatively good and decent, all the one waviness and all the inconsistency in the world rules just didn't make it an enjoyable story for me. That's unfortunate. Again, wasn't boring. It's fine. The middle like slice of life adventure stuff is probably going to be enjoyable for most people. It's just that I couldn't get over all the one waviness. I couldn't get over all of the world rule and game rule inconsistencies, to me at least. So unfortunately, it gets a score of 6 out of 10. That's Lord of the Flame, a LitRPG novel, Call of Carrethen, book number 2, with a score of 6 out of 10. So there we go. Okay, on to our next review, which is going to be Rally Bender's Game Changer. This is the second book in the Rally Bender, the third book in the Rally Bender series, written by Michael Antonoff. Okay, it is 306 pages, $5.99. It is not available on Kindle Unlimited. Here's the author's description. A war is broken out in the galaxy. The great spacefaring races are all entangled in the fight, and even at the very edge of the known universe, humanity can hear the echoes of its distant bloody battles. Our citizens and defenders of the Gecko are also caught up in this all-encompassing conflict. Is that a good thing for humanity or not? The answer is up for debate. On the other hand, the Gecko will no longer take the trouble to defend a planet inhabited by people, which is worrying. But on the other, might humanity have the chance to make a name for themselves and take a more active role in interstellar politics? Nat is with the Shimaru crew on the front lines. He's just changed class to listener, and his friends find themselves right in the thick of this grand interstellar war. So that kind of gives you a good description of like where the story is for the most part. Full disclosure, I received a copy an advanced copy review. I purchased a copy when it became available. My review is really simple for this novel. It's one of the few series that I just absolutely know I'm going to enjoy every single time. I don't usually take a ton of notes here, just to like a few to make sure like nothing like really shifts or breaks in the story. It's a slice of life LitRPG. So in book 3 in the game storyline, I should say, takes place almost entirely off it. So if you're looking for something that felt a little more space sci-fi adventure with like spaceships and space pirates and space battles, this is definitely the one in the series that's going to be for you. There's a lot of events for the main characters in your class. The listener, I like that. But overall, it's just like the slice of life adventure story. There's adventuring, there goes in quest, there goes fighting. There's lots of like, there's some politicky stuff. There's, exploration again, like the main character's class system, and then the new things he can do and what that means for like the game world. And there's some very interesting twists in the show, which I'm not going to ruin, but again, this is like that's an interesting place. I'm kind of not sure where the author is going to go with that, but like, that's interesting for like the plot and storyline. So overall, really good stuff. It's like a really simple short review. I had a good time with it. If you're a fan of the series, you're going to like this story. It fits right in line with everything else. And again, it's one of the fewer like good, to me at least, sci-fi LitRPG stories out there. It's also written by some nice Russian folks. That's a Game Changer, Reality Benders, book number 3, LitRPG series, with a score of 7.4 out of 10. So there you go. Short. Okay, on to our 7th review. It's Caverns of Spirits, a LitRPG and GameLit adventure, Stonehaven League, book number 3, written by Carrie Summers. Okay. 318 pages, $4.99. It is available on Kindle Limited. And here's the author's description. Devon is faced off with half-mad zombie frogmen, a demon war priestess, and a 1,000-year-old curse. But can she survive another attempt to cook dinner? Sometimes it would be nice to catch a break. Devon, a professional gamer, has a settlement to grow into a city, a character she'd love to focus on leveling, and some kitchen cabinets that really need restocking. Unfortunately, the fate of the Relic Online game world is at stake, torn asunder by battling Creator 8 Eyes. Demons rise through the planar rifts, rampaging across the physical realm. The ancient city of Ishlodar holds power that might turn the tide. If only Devon, the brave heroine chosen as the city's champion, could finish her epic questline to gain control of the place. The in-game events would be challenging enough if she weren't confronted with disasters in the real world. After a horrifying mountain bike crash, Devon's friend Tamara needs her support. Emerson, a programmer from the gaming company, can't unravel the troubling actions of the demonic AI Zaya without Devon's help. And yeah, there's a little problem of a raid force of anarchist players coming to demolish Stonehaven, the only true home Devon has ever known. No problem, right? So there you go. That's the author's description. And actually, to me, it was a really good description. It kind of encapsulate all the major themes in the story, all the major problems, but also some of like the humor side of the story. You kind of get a good feel for like the author's sense of humor, some of the gamer jokes in there, and like the plotline. So good stuff. Again, another short review because again, this is to me an established series. It's already developed the format that really works for the author, in my opinion. It's already kind of nutshelled some of the issues I saw with book 1 were lessened in book 2, and they disappear completely in book 3. Like this is a good series. There's all the expected town building here, adventuring, character development, quirky sub-stories, leveling that the readers have come to expect, a little bit of magical game theory. And it's really good. Like I said, this is kind of, to me, book 3 kind of fine-tuned an already good series. I was actually surprised by the genuinely good real life storyline that kind of progresses the cyber thriller aspects of the series. I thought that was like a good progression arc in the story. And overall, it's just a good read. Like, so the author has found her format and she continues producing like a really good story. It's an interesting thing. So overall, a lot of the stories is like, again, slice of life-ish, in that the main characters go on adventures. They have like these goals. And it's good. I enjoyed it. There's not much to say about it. I had a good time with it. Score 7.6 out of 10. No real problems here. Again, I get shorter reviews as the series goes on, as long as like nothing goes wrong, because they've already established themselves. Man, this is definitely one of the series that, again, has already established itself as a good series. So good score, 7.6 out of 10. For Caverns of Spirits, a LitRPG and GameLit adventure, Stonehaven League, book number 3, that with a score of 7.6 out of 10. So there you go. Next review. Okay, Freehaven Online, Lady Thunderlord into Hades, a LitRPG adventure, Freehaven Online, book number 2, by June Prince. Okay, it is 661 pages, $5.99, not available on Kindle Unlimited. Here's the author's description. Still stranded in the virtual world of Freehaven Online, the toxic muffins, led by Justine, are given new hope after a beloved guild member died upon failing digitization. Marie has come online. No one can message her, but they have a quest leading them into the depths of Hades, an underworld that serves two planes of mortal existence, to retrieve a lost soul and escort it back to the living. They hope that's what Marie is. For mortals, entering the underworld is no easy task. There's no respawn within Hades, and resurrection spells now have a lengthy cooldown. Justine's party will face monsters, ghosts, and even deities in their journey. To make matters worse, Hades doesn't release souls easily, and getting back may be just as testing. Justine needs to forge a rock-solid adventuring party to find the gates of the underworld, locate Marie, and bring her home to safety. Because if she doesn't, Marie could be lost to both the real and digital worlds forever. So there you go. That seems very epic. The actual thing is not nearly as epic sounding as it is. Okay. Book number 1 in this series got a score 6 out of 10 for me. It didn't really work for me. Book number 2 is a solid improvement. Like, it really is. Like, I was super happy that it did actually improve in the storytelling, and in all the issues I had with book 1 are completely gone here. They don't exist. I'm like, so the like kudos to the author for making a much improved story, at least from my point of view. This is a solid LitRPG adventure, takes the characters from the series into the battles of Hades. They go on some quirky Greek mythology themed adventures. One of the more funny ones, like finding new books for Charon to read, because he's been in the underworld forever and he doesn't get new books apparently. And some story setups in the story for book number 3, which is already on pre-order. And just set up for getting the main character into the story is like super simple. This whole novel felt like super streamlined compared to book 1. I'm not going to go into like all the issues I had with book 1. It didn't work for me in a lot of ways. And book 2 it's a much better product. Like, for me, like, the main character is reintroduced. You get her into the adventure like within the first like few percentages of the story, and from there it's just like, oh, it's adventure, action, cooldowns, and it's all like, it seems like it's a lot more well thought out, and it's a lot more streamlined as far as like getting through the things that the story needs to get to, like the points of progression. And for me, it's just like, oh, this feels like almost like a well thought out story. It's like, oh, it was super impressive to see, for me anyways, the progression in like the differences between the stories. Like, oh, this one feels a lot smoother, a lot more streamlined. I was like, oh yeah, good for you, man. Good for you, June. There are a couple of negatives in the strategy that are worth mentioning. One, there's one big emotional moment for book 1 that's kind of undone, and the author already talked about in the story in the novel, so it's not a spoiler. 2, the author unfortunately doesn't do a good job of like summarizing the events of book 1, or reintroducing like readers to the world, where like, these are the game mechanics, these are the premise of the series. It just kind of assumes that you've read book 1 and shoots off. Like, so it doesn't explain who everybody is in the novel. It doesn't explain who the characters are, what their relationships are, unfortunately, to like a really great degree. So if it's going to be a little harder for people who haven't read book 1 to get into book 2, unfortunately. That's just the consequences of the storytelling decision. Again, on one aspect, yes, it really does like streamline things. Like, you get into that action adventure stuff really quickly. On the other side of it, it's like, oh, maybe like a little bit of a summary, or like maybe it's like a subsection saying, oh, this is what happened in the first book. Might have been helpful for people who don't want to read book 1, who haven't read it in a little while, to kind of remind them who everybody is, what's the fundamental plot, like what's the premise of like, why is this person trapped in the game world, why does she ride a motorcycle in a fantasy world, that kind of stuff. You know what I mean? So those are like 2 small shortcomings, but again, they aren't detriments in the story. I just think that this novel is going to be a lot more appreciated to people who have already read book 1 and more recently, and it'll be harder for people who haven't read book 1 to just like jump in the middle of the series. That's it. That's all it is. Overall, again, I liked book 2 in the series more than book 1, and I definitely appreciate there's an evident effort for the author to improving the storytelling, and for me, it definitely paid off. Gets a score of 7.3 out of 10 for me. Book 1 got a 6 out of 10, so that's definitely an improvement from my point of view. Score of 7.3 out of 10. That's Freehaven Online, Lady Thunderlord, Into Hades, a LitRPG adventure. So there we go. And that's it. we are finished, ladies and gentlemen. That's the show. Thanks for following us. Thanks for listening, hanging out. You can follow us on Facebook, Twitter, YouTube, Patreon, and our website at LitRPGPodcast.com. Of course, there's some other LitRPG Facebook groups that we have links for in the show notes if you guys want to go hang out. There are lots of LitRPG authors there that you can talk to and chat with and ask questions about, and nice little communities we have there. If you want to enjoy the podcast and want to support us in any way, shape, or form, remember, it's because of you folks that we don't have ads, and that we don't have that the show is free and everything. So if you want to find out all the ways to support the podcast, you can find out all the ways to do so at litrpgpodcast.com/support. But again, folks, thanks for hanging out with me. I'm always surprised every week almost where I'm just talking about stuff I love, like the LitRPG genre, and like my love of reading and writing it, and like people watch me do this, and I'm always super surprised that there's such a great community. So I just want to thank everybody for taking the time to hang out with me while I do these shows and talk about and gush about the thing that I love, LitRPG. And remember, till we can hang out again, folks, remember to go read some LitRPG. Goodbye, everybody.